this cozy little group. I guess it's hard to compete with the Warriors. So thank you for showing up. And we might have some score updates at some point tonight so you all can stay abreast of what's happening. I believe they're down by 4 points right now, but we're in the first quarter. It's going to be totally fine. We don't want them to tire themselves out. But anyway, thank you for joining us for Life After Release, Removing Barriers for Formerly Incarcerated People. If you want to move a little bit closer to the front, feel free to do that, but don't feel pressured to do that. I'm Megan Abel. I'm the Director of Advocacy for TechEquity Collaborative. And if it's your first event with us, I especially thank you for joining us. TechEquity, for those of you who are unfamiliar, believes in a Bay Area economy, tech economy that's more equitable for everyone, and that of course includes our formerly incarcerated neighbors. So we're excited tonight to learn from folks from city government and community activists and from the private sector about what we can do to support our formerly incarcerated neighbors as they reintegrate into the community. If you believe in TechEquity's vision, I would encourage you to become a member by supporting us financially. You can do that at techequitycollaborative.org, or if you want some assistance, Ramon in the back can help you figure out how to sign up to become a monthly donor to help us do this work. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for tonight, Fahad Qurashi. Fahad is the Director of South Bay Programming at TechEquity and my colleague. And before his work with us at TechEquity, he worked for the Youth Leadership Initiative and is a native of San Jose. And he's really experienced in community work. He's worked on over 20 community-led campaigns. And so I'm excited to have him help us uncover what's going on with our formerly incarcerated neighbors tonight. So with that, take it away, Fahad.
Appreciate that. Good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? Good. Thank you so much for your time and your commitment for being here today. These conversations are really important in many ways just to even normalize the issue. We know that there's 7 million people, more than that probably, in the justice system according to the latest round of data. 2.3 of those folks are in facilities, 840,000 on parole, and about 3.6 million on probation. That's a big number. And in many ways, somebody you love, somebody you know, is most likely involved in the system as well. And again, today we're here to better understand the challenges facing formerly incarcerated people. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to hear from experts. Experts in terms of, folks who are formerly incarcerated activists, equity advocates, folks doing incredible work in terms of corporate and tech settings, folks doing great work in prisons. It's going to be pretty diverse, and I hope it's going to be informative for folks and inspiring in many ways. I know that the work that these folks have done has been really inspiring to me to hear about, and hopefully it leads to some sort of action in terms of next steps. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists, and we're going to go ahead and jump into some of the questions. And does that sound good, everybody? Cool. So our first panelist is Jon-Paul Ales-Barnicoat, and he's the Vice President of Employee Experience for Fandom. Huge fan for Fandom. Fandom is a global entertainment media brand powered by fan passion, so in many ways user-led. In his role, Jon-Paul is helping accelerate Fandom's growth through leadership, talent models, attracting and developing emerging media talent, and building a culture of employee development, agility, and creativity. Fandom is also a fair chance employer that has great apprenticeship programs for formerly incarcerated people. And Jon-Paul will speak to that today in terms of the initiatives and what tech companies can be doing to be better and to be examples like Jon-Paul and the work that he does is. So if we go ahead and jump let me introduce the other panelists.
I think Jafria needs to be introduced.
Yeah. My bad. So I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Jafria Morris, who is the Reentry Police Planner for San Francisco's Adult Probation Department Reentry Division and the facilitator of the City and County of San Francisco's Reentry Council and Community Corrections Partnership. Jafra is a native of San Francisco's Bayview's Hunter Point District. She also holds a master's degree in social work from Cal State East Bay and a Juris Doctorate from the Golden Gate University. She's also the author of the San Francisco Women's Justice Reform Initiative and has been leading her department in gender-responsive work and implementation. Heavy hitters, heavy hitters. So, our third panelist, John Jones III, is currently on staff for Just Cities as a Director of Community and Political Engagement. As a father of 3 and third generation East Oakland resident, John is a formerly incarcerated advocate who was unemployed and homeless for 18 months. Seeking to improve his community, John became involved in organizing and advocacy to empower not only himself but others by using his personal story of pain, trauma, faith, and transformation. He works hard to inspire young, and sometimes not so young, people, as well as fighting for policy change. And we're really excited to hear about that today. John has worked on several local and state campaigns and ballot measures, including Measure FF, Measure Z, Prop 47, Prop 57, which were all wins with the Warriors. John is a passionate and vocal advocate for affordable housing, employment, violent reduction, ending mass incarceration, and advancing racial equity. In his spare time, John enjoys time with his children and can be heard rooting loudly for the Oakland Raiders, the A's, and surprise, surprise, the Golden State Warriors. So huge sacrifice for all of us here today, because we know Game 1 is going on right now. Great. So, Jon-Paul, we're going to start with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So it's clear that you're dedicated to being a fair chance employer. What does that really mean to you?
I think it means a couple of things. I have the luxury of, I lead HR and talent for my company, and I have the luxury for working with a company that is very much about community. It's how we started. It's the foundation of who we are. And initially Fandom, or Wikia, was a community-based platform for fans of pop culture. But what it really became as a company was a place for people that really wanted to connect with other people with similar interests. And what's interesting about that is that it's those common interests that bring people together. Most of it's done online, obviously, but a lot of it is done through social settings as well. And there's not really a lot of room or tolerance for any thinking outside of, we have this common interest, we are a community because of it. And so that really has translated very well into the work that I've been, lucky to be able to do as part of the last mile and some of the stuff that we've done at the company itself, because those barriers don't exist for us in many ways because of who we are as a company. And I don't take that for granted. I recognize that not every company has that same luxury. I've worked for a lot of those companies. I've worked for GE, Motorola, J&J in my past life. So a lot of it has to do with the environment that we're in. But to me, it's really about removing all the barriers and just making it about the work, making it about somebody's ability to do the work that needs to be done and their passion for the work that needs to be done.
So you had talked about the environment and kind of de-escalating barriers to create that space. Mm-hmm. How would you build a company culture that you've done that now, right? How would you recommend building a company culture that is inclusive of every walk of life, including those that may have been incarcerated?
We're actually going through a pretty massive initiative right now around diversity and inclusion within our company. We've gone through a lot as a company in the last year or so, and we were acquired by a private equity firm. We acquired 2 other companies. We'll likely do other acquisitions, and so we've blended different organizations together in the last 18 months or so, and different organizations from different geographies around the country, which is and on some level globally as well, which is really interesting because we had this pretty strong cultural base, and then it sort of, it metamorphed, it changed or evolved almost overnight. And so one of the ways that we are trying to reinforce the culture of who we are is really through a lot of conversation, but also through a lot of inclusion. And what I mean by that is, we have very, very strong diversity and inclusion teams in each of our locations. We have a very strong corporate initiative around diversity and inclusion. We talk about it at every company meeting. We talk about it at every executive staff meeting. We talk about it at the board level. It's one of our level 1 priorities that our board of directors is holding us accountable to. And I think that really needs to be in place. You really need to have that level of commitment to, to really affect the culture in a positive way. And you need to provide a platform for people to be expressive about the things that are important to each of them, because not everybody has the same passion point or the same passion area, and we've certainly seen some of that. But we're very committed to giving everybody a platform to have a voice around what is important to them, and inviting and expecting participation across the company from people that may not necessarily have the same passion for autism awareness, as an example, or something else, but they know that they've got a community around them that will support them in their expression of their passion for that particular cause.
You had mentioned the Last Mile.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that project? And
Yeah,
what
sure.
You do? Yeah.
I mean, this will go down in my personal history as one of the things that I'm most proud of, other than my family. Several years ago, I was introduced to Beverly Peretti and Chris Redlitz, who both very, very well known and very successful business people in the San Francisco area. And they, with their own money, started a project inside of San Quentin called the Last Mile. And the Last Mile initially started out as a entrepreneurship program inside prison. And their goal from the outset was to create an opportunity for incarcerated people to have an outlet to express their entrepreneurship. They've come up with a business idea. We'll train you in how to make it happen, and so that when you ultimately are released, you have a foundation to at least to work from. And what they recognize very quickly is, and oh, by the way, do that within the confines of a prison, right? So no access to the internet. Many of the inmates have never seen a cell phone, never been on the internet. And there's a lot of gating factors to people being able to participate in that sort of thing. But where it really evolved was it became a coding school in this modern digital world. And so it very quickly transformed into a coding school. And today there's as many as, I think we're up to almost 60 graduates from the program. They're out in the community today with jobs in tech. My company, we've sponsored a couple of interns, folks that have been released that then come and work for us on an internship basis. And we've actually hired one of them to be a full-time engineer on our team. It's an amazing program. And most of the folks in the program are long-term or life sentence inmates. That program now has been digitized. I saw a team yesterday that's putting video instruction to the learning and development platform that they're building, and they're now shipping it out to prisons, not just in the state of California, but across the country, in some of the toughest sentencing states in the country. And so it's an amazing program. They're doing a lot of really great work. They're now in some of the women's prisons here in California, and in some of the youth facilities as well.
Excellent work. So what are some of the benefits you've seen in the process, and maybe that also ties into what the return on investment is for a company that has the environment, that has the mechanisms in place to support formerly incarcerated people?
I think the benefits for us have been really, in some ways, immeasurable. I mean, it wasn't easy. As much as I, am painting this very rosy picture of our environment. We're a great company. We have a great group of employees. There were still people that were worried, and concerned that we were bringing, especially, formerly incarcerated people from San Quentin. I mean, San Quentin alone has this lore about it that's really interesting. And I think the benefits for us from a company perspective have been, it's been a real statement to the organization that we're committed to diversity, and that we're committed to giving people a fair chance, and that we're committed to being a model for what that looks like. The truth is, our last mile folks are among the hardest working folks, certainly at the internship level. They're not perfect. They didn't have the same opportunities that everybody else did. But they're certainly among some of the most dedicated and some of the hardest working. So, a lot of what I've been impressed with is both the organization and our ability to accept those folks into our environment. But also the two gentlemen that we've had working at the company, their ability to assimilate, but also assimilate in a way that was true to who they were, and not, they weren't playing a character in our environment.
And you talked about barriers. One barrier that we know that exists is housing. So, in your view, how's the housing challenge here in the Bay Area and our region? How does that affect your employees, and especially your employees that are formerly incarcerated?
Yeah, I think when you and I talked, I think I mentioned this. One of the things that you come to realize very quickly when you're hiring someone that was formerly incarcerated, especially out of a long-term program like the Last Mile, is, oftentimes many of these folks, the first ID they've ever been issued was their prison ID. So when they get out of prison, they have to go get a license, and some of them for the very first time, they have to find housing. And the sad part to me is many of these folks are forced to be released in the area that they offended. And that just is insane to me. To put someone back in the same situation that they were in when they offended, to me is criminal in and of itself. We've advocated for the folks that we want to hire into our company to have them released locally so that we can employ them. And I won't go into all the details of how we've done that, but we've done that. The unfortunate part is, I said earlier, there's upwards of 60 people that have been released from this really fantastic program. But the truth is, less than a third of them have been able to stay in the Bay Area because they can't afford it. And so they've been forced to go back to, there's a young man that I just absolutely adore. He's a fantastic coder, and he had to get released back to Stockton. Well, there's no tech jobs in Stockton. And the longer he stays on the shelf, so to speak, and stays away from these skills that he's developed, the further away from what he works so hard to gain he gets. That's the impact for me for housing, and that is, to me, that is the weakest link in this whole chain. So,
thank you. And before we move on, anything that folks here today should be thinking about doing that could help either the projects you've been working on, like the Last Mile, or just in general, any walk-away points for folks from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the housing being the weakest link in this chain is true. But I think that the message should also be that the answer to this problem of incarceration and recidivism is jobs at the end of the day. Everybody wants to be productive. Everybody wants to be able to pay for their family and have a good life. And any barriers that we can eliminate from that process of giving people an opportunity to show what they can contribute and to support them in that process, to me, is the answer to all of this stuff. And so, I go around and speak to a bunch of companies throughout the year. I'm the only HR person involved with the Last Mile, and it kills me, because at the end of the day, companies need to open up jobs for people, and unfortunately, the HR team kind of holds the keys to that city on some level. And yet there's not enough of people like in my role that are involved. It's great for engineers to go into Last Mile and do coding training and all that kind of stuff, but they're not creating jobs. So, to me, it starts with the jobs, but and if you give somebody the ability to make a great income and to improve their situation that got them into trouble in the first place, the other stuff will figure it out.
Thank you so much for your perspective in terms of corporate tech opportunities and solutions. I think it's really important. And now as we transition to our government representative, Joffrey, really want to understand why the issue of reentry and life after incarceration is important to you.
So as in my bio, I just want to correct my title. It's the reentry policy.
Gotcha.
I work for adult probation, but reentry policy planner for the Reentry Council of San Francisco. It's very important to me. Just imagine, like, I grew up in Bayview, Hunters Point, and not the new semi-gentrified Bayview, Hunters Point. I grew up when it was real, you know, a very vibrant, rich community, but also impacted by poverty, you know, environmental racism. We have 80% of the sewage of San Francisco, and many different effects, government policies that was put in place why people were kind of in this situation. And so, like, educated there, everything, and got in trouble too. But luckily, I was never incarcerated, and I had that kind of opportunity to go to San Francisco State and then continue on. And the whole time, I was like social work, because it was like, how did I make it and so many people didn't? You know, and it's not because I was perfect. Like, they didn't lock me in the house, and I came, you know, I graduated high school with a 2.0, barely getting out, you know, and so I just felt it was my duty. Like, people invested in me, in my community, for me to get to this spot, because they saw something in me for me to go back and give back. And so I kind of just going into state, I just kind of gave my life to social services. And it just was just a general pilgrimage into criminal justice. Like, I went from like I say, working for welfare department and social work, to child welfare, to criminal justice. And that is such a great, like aerial view, because you really see it from the family to, like, coming from a community, family impacts, to then criminal justice, and all these systems intertwined with individuals. And then you say life after incarceration. Some of us was incarcerated before we was even incarcerated, you know, with that kind of mindset. And then, like, really thinking Bayview is it. Like, Bayview is it. I run a class now called Mothers Matters. And the women was like, I ain't even been out of California. Like, you know, and so you say life after incarceration, what about life after your community? People, like, are so stuck. So this work is super important to me because it's impacting me. I mean, Black, San Francisco is 6% Black. And that is like a good number. It's probably 4%. But every day our jail is 50% Black. And it's across systems, child welfare system, health system, everything. And then why is that? And that is the work that got me in this work of figuring out why is that, and how can I stop? How can I be that person in the system helping individuals that look like me?
So tell us more about the work that you're doing with the San Francisco Adult Probation Department.
So AB 109, let me just start with the AB 109. So that is the whole realignment and putting the onus back on counties to kind of rehabilitate people, and basically reducing the numbers that we send to CDCR, California Correctional Facilities. And San Francisco County did a really unique model in the Adult Probation Department. We took our money from AB 109 and created a reentry center. And it runs 8 to 5, and where we have, where you can come in, fresh out of jail, parole, anywhere, and come in and get your food stamps, your driver's license, your GED, You know, we have forensic, UCSF forensic case managers there. You know, like, and it's this hub. And so when you come in, unlike other reentry centers that was created AB 109, it's not the sheriff that's checking you in. We have metal detectors, but it's just like you going to the club. So like, you know, I mean, people want, because we also in public safety. So we want to make sure that people who come in are safe, as well as our staff is safe. So we understand that, and that has been like, you know, the community sometimes says, well, why am I still going through this metal detector? And you say, well, it's regular people that's just welcoming. You go through metal detectors in the club, you know, in the airport. You don't look at TSA how you would look at a sheriff, you know? So we have non-sworn staff that check you in, know your name, talk to you. Even sometimes we find like certain little like weapons, because people live on the streets, some of them, right? We say, you gotta put that in the locker. You know, I'm not gonna take your little pocket knife. Go put it in the locker. And you know, like that, because we understand our clientele. And then people come, we serve breakfast, and they get what they need. And that's in our center. And then when you talk about the work that I'm doing, is that the Reentry Council started 10 years ago. And so this is just a wonderful council. It has 17 city departments at the table. We have a mayor liaison. We have a board of supervisor member that sits on this council. We have someone from federal probation. We have someone from CDCR, and then the other criminal justice bodies, DA, public defender. Then we also have, the most important piece, 7 members of formerly incarcerated community. And so then we also run 2 subcommittees, which is the policy subcommittee and the direct services subcommittee. And that's, anyone can be on, like TechEquity can be on, or any of your firms can be on to sit on there, because it's people that's in the trenches doing the work, as well as formerly incarcerated people who want to come in and do the work but may not want to sit on the council. And so we elevate so much stuff that's going on in the community. Right now, we're working on humanizing language. And that was co-authored by Eric Henderson from Initiate Justice. Formerly, he was a former employee at Ella Baker. And humanizing language. When I first came into criminal justice, I was reading all these articles, the scholar in me, right? You read them, and you read the word offender, and I was like, okay, and I was talking, I met with this lady named Harriet at legal services for prisoners with children, right? All of us are none. They amazing organization. And I said the word offender, and she know my heart, right? And she stopped me. She said, wait, have you told a lie before? I can't even say I haven't, right? That would be a lie in itself. I said, of course. She said, how would you feel if I introduced you as, this is Joffrey, and she's a liar. Wow. She's a liar. And every time I introduce your name, I said she's a liar. That's what we do when we say the word offender, or even lifer, right? People, you're no longer in jail. You're no longer in prison. You're not a lifer. You are a person. So right now we're elevating humanizing language resolution that will be introduced at our board of supervisors. So when you change policies, criminal justice policies, before you put offender, just say formerly incarcerated and stuff like that, because that means something. I don't want to be known as Joffrey the liar, you know, and I'm sure like a mistake should not define you.
Excellent work. Can you tell us a little bit about the Ban the Box campaign?
So I just gave out, I have to just say that in this space, I wish someone from legal services for prisoners with children, because that was started with All of Us or None, a campaign they started in 2003. Ban the Box. And that Ban the Box was also not only the box for criminal convictions on applications, but it's also housing. And that started in 03, you know, and now we fast forward to 16 years, it's been law, AB 1008. is the California law that prohibits people from asking, have you convicted, been convicted of a crime? Because basically you're not even letting me in the door. And so San Francisco, we passed that legislation in 2014 and amended it in 2018. And we have our whole our Human Rights Commission overseas. It's called the Fair Chance Ordinance, and that also in San Francisco applies for housing, affordable housing. It's not yet for private people, but AB 1008 or does more because it requires private and public employers in this whole state to interview people, get to know them, and say, I'm gonna give you the job before looking at your criminal history, right? Like, get to know me before you judge me. And then and then it has off-limit questions. Like if diversion programs that you may have went through, or if you expunge your record, people cannot require it unless it's required by statute. And come on, we know, like, if you're working maybe with children and other things, but majority of jobs do not require that. And then if we look at another legislation that kind of was like ban the box part 2, is AB 2138, which is licensing, because so many careers require a license. And they have like candor, like we're attacking a lot of stuff in criminal justice because people can't be like cosmetologists. Like, what does that have to do with doing your hair? I think even gardening is a license, so all of this, like ban the box is one thing, but now it's ban the box part 2, ban the box part 3. Because even when we say required to ask you about your criminal record for certain jobs with children, think about who's impacted by that. Who's more likely to work with elderly people and children? Women. And when we look at the disproportionality of Black women, not able to even get into those systems, when child welfare is packed, and then having this barrier and we say, well, this is by statute. I mean, right now, it's a coalition going on to really even peel back that part of the onion, to open up that access, because we need people of color in those positions and doing the work of helping people. And so, ban the box 03. But now just know it's derivatives, because it's more steps.
And to go on in a different direction, in terms, because you had talked about humanizing language, and so what are some of the attitudes and barriers towards that represent the reentry population?
What is it, like not in my backyard?
Yeah.
That's what we are seeing. But one of the things too is barriers, like at adult probation, we have about $13 million we give out in the community from AB 109. And if you're on probation for 5 years, that's like a plus. Because why? We're going to give you your own SRO. You'll have your own SRO up for 5 years. You can do amazing work. But then when you get off probation, you're no longer eligible for our housing. And it really is not a step up. We don't have California has not created a step up type program. You're off parole now. Here's your next part of housing. So many times our housing is connected to your supervision. And so that is important, because then you go into the open market and you try to rent a house. And then they run your background. And they have different algorithms, different systems. We had someone from Checker come by and kind of tell us that. And you'd be surprised what people can pull up. Wow. And having a criminal record, especially a drug offense for HUD housing, is just impossible to get. So it definitely needs to be policies, because as soon as you say criminal record, people will be like, oh my God, they must be that criminal. It could be shoplifting, it could be any forgery, not even like crimes that you would think like, oh, someone is coming to harm me, like it's a murderer next door. But even you don't know the situation. Right. You don't know the situation of people and why they even have that charge too. So something really needs to be done legislatively about some kind of step up housing, because so many people re-enter and their housing is tied into their supervision. So once your supervision is over, where do you go? Like San Francisco, then we're gonna be like, go ahead in our homeless system. But how do you leave from an SRO to now a cop? You know, so we try to work with people to get them housing. Our muni drivers are sleeping in cars. So we try and try, but most times we end up putting people in like finding houses in Vallejo, Sac, Antioch, super far away from their community because it's just so expensive.
And so for the policy piece too, how can well, I think you defined how policy can shift this narrative, but how do we get government to create those types of policies?
So, you know, one thing we were talking about this too, we're over the phone, is that it's just interesting time right now. If you're really in criminal justice, this is a great time. Like, it's on the upswing. You know, policy is so many positive policies. On the 22nd of this month, I just took 20 people where we were lobbying for 7 bills. You know, one of them was AB 1076 15 bill, which does automatic expungements, where you don't have to even put in the paperwork. Like, the system just automated. Like, again, like I tell people, if we get a ticket right now, we go do traffic school, that ticket not supposed to show up. Clear it, right? And we automatically assume it. Why? And then this bill is kind of creating that for people with a criminal justice ding on their records. Like, why do I gotta go petition? I gotta go into court, use all these resources when we can have an automated system. And those kind of policies are helping. Clearing up the data. It was like 60% of arrests don't have a disposition. So what if you got an arrest from 3 years ago? People reading your stuff like, you about to go to jail again? You know what I'm saying? And then, I had a woman with me, and she said I was working for the jail. I had jail clearance, and they took me to jail on a warrant I had 4 years ago. And I had to go to court, and I got cited out. But she was like, I was arrested. And then I had to reprove myself again, saying that was an old warrant, because someone didn't do proper record management. So, those are very important as well, right? So, right now, I just gotta lift up people that's really East Bay, Senator Skinner has been definitely leading the force of putting out real positive criminal justice stuff. Senator, Assemblymember Bonta, you know, you all are electing great people. I gotta lift up Phil Ting from San Francisco, David Chu with the licensing, you know, it's really good work. Scott Wiener working on right now, SB 136 to repeal the 1 year automatic, if you've been in prison 2 years and they want to send you to prison for 2 years, now you're going to get a year extra for each time you've already been in prison. And that's the most common enhancement. And then that makes sense. So you mean the crime I did gives me 2 years in prison, but the fact that I've been to prison twice, and I'm now going to get 4 years? That is crazy to me, right? And so, California is really holding on to its progressive roots and really pushing some stuff like that. And I would advise you all, if you want to do more, to reach out to your legislators to help these things pass through the other house, because this is what we need if we expect our returning community members to get back in the workforce, to get that job, like you say, to get that housing that they need.
Yeah, and I know the advocacy piece being a key action item. I know we had discussed a couple of other action items that you would recommend for folks to walk away with today. Could you share with the group what were some actions that folks could take?
Yeah, so when we talk about tech community, I was just talking to him. I was like, we use the last mile because we have a book called Getting Out and staying out. And that's on our reentry council website. But like if you look at government, like our websites suck. They're not user friendly. Like I was like, one of the things you all can come help us make it user friendly. You know, sit on, don't just feel like, hey, I'm gonna go and hire one person from reentry. Be in the voice, talk about, if you're in the room, you can think of innovation to help the community. Like right now, we're talking about automating systems. Maybe you could have did a prototype of automating systems to help it even go faster because people can see it. It's so many ways to plug in. And it just depends how deep the tech community want to come in. If you just want to like kind of like what I see around Christmas time is people go to St. Anthony's and serve a plate. Well, most of you guys got kitchens. Why don't you let them in and eat in your kitchen? Why do you come to St. Anthony's? And that's the thing, like if you want to help, I know criminal justice is sexy right now, but this has been going on, like, you know, and really how we know you want to be good neighbors is coming to the table, be a part of our subcommittee. You know, come to our community appreciation dinner we have on June 13th, 5 to 8, St. Mary's. That's done by the Archdiocese of San Francisco as well as adult probation. It's so many ways to get plugged in that you feel good and we feel like you really care.
You make sure to send us that information for the June 13th event.
Definitely, I will.
Thank you. So we're gonna move to John Jones, third. What's the score?
59-49.
Who's up?
Warriors are down by 10.
Oh. All right.
But I promise I won't let that reflect the energy that I give you.
Aren't you curious if there's a fourth? I am.
A fourth?
John Jones the third. He's
Oh.
got 3 kids. He's got
Is there a fourth?
No.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Appreciate that. I think, there's a lot of perspective I know John Jones is going to bring, John Jones III is going to bring to the table here. I just wanted to, before you get into your piece too, because I want to give you your space, one thing I neglected to tell everyone in my introduction is I'm also formerly incarcerated too. I was incarcerated at the age of 18. Through that process, a lot of mental health issues arose. I was very fortunate to have a family that had my back, that kept pushing me towards school and had resources too, which I know a lot of folks don't. But even regardless of that, I remember going to school and wondering if everyone was going to hire me anyways. My record was going to pop up. I'd stayed at the Youth Leadership Institute for 14 years, partly because I loved the work and partly because I wasn't sure if it was going to cause issues going to another organization. So the work that you all do is super inspiring, and I just wanted to say that before I give you your space to share your story too. With that, why is this work important to you?
Because I'm fighting not only for my life, but I'm fighting for the life of my 3 kids. I have 3 sons. I am a single father to 2 of them. One's 17, my youngest son is 4. So at the end of the day, for me, it's more than simply a matter of an issue or even more than saying this is the right thing to do. It is literally survival.
And so you talk about survival, it's important to understand context. And so what are some of the root causes or systemic issues that lead to the high rates of incarceration we see, particularly in communities of color and marginalized communities and low-income communities?
For me, I think it's always important to do 2 things as I answer this. First of all, I always look at life through the macro level and the micro level. Because I think sometimes we segment and we isolate issues. Like, for example, as someone that's formerly incarcerated, when you get arrested, the system treats you as if society is perfect and you're the outlier. The second thing is this, the 13th Amendment, right? In school, I was taught that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. Half true. Actually, it didn't. There's a word called accept. Slavery is abolished except for punishment of a crime for which one has been convicted of. So essentially, we are seeing modern legalized slavery. As opposed to calling it plantation, we refer to it as a prison. We got to start there for a reason. Because when we start talking about how communities of color and other marginalized communities are impacted by over-police and incarceration, let's be clear. When we talk about incarceration in the incarceral state, What you're literally talking about is money, budgets. Let's be clear, slavery was about profit. It was about making money. How do you justify making money enslaving human beings? Well, first of all, you have to do some deflection. These are not human beings, they're subhuman. They're animals. They're 1/3 of who we are. And that relates to the language. It's the same thing when you talk about people who are formerly incarcerated. When you refer to people as thugs and criminals and gangbangers, it doesn't engender a sense of shared humanity. Before you can oppress somebody, you have to first dehumanize them. So we're dealing with budgets. For example, instead of California, the CCPOA, the California Correctional Peace Officer Association, is the most powerful union in California. They control the narrative around what constitutes public safety. So we operate under capitalism. So if you stimulate a need, you create a market. So when you create barriers for people, both pre-incarceration and post-incarceration, then you put in place a system that becomes self-sustaining, right? Self-perpetuating. That's why I don't like this idea of a second chance, because many of us never had a first chance. You follow me? So then you put people, as Jon-Paul said, back into the same community that failed them to begin with. And you say, okay, this time around, even though you got these additional barriers, this time it's on you to make it, to survive. The system is not broken. Our criminal justice system is not simply a matter of a need for reform. I want to be clear, the system is doing exactly what it is designed to do. Once we approach that level in our analysis, we are in a better position to completely deconstruct this dehumanizing system.
Snaps for that. What are the barriers that the reentry population faces, theoretically? And then if you could walk us through step by step, somebody getting out of incarceration.
I appreciate the way you phrased that question, because first of all, once again, formerly incarcerated people on a macro level, we are not a homogenous, monolithic community. That's dehumanizing in and of itself. And what I mean by that real quickly, like for example, sometimes I meet folks and they say, well, John, you're doing all this amazing work. I wish we can extract this essence within you and give it to other people so they can do the same thing. That's the quickest way to never hear from me again. Please don't ever say that to me again, because it's dehumanizing, right? First of all, when we're talking about this, what is dehumanizing? What does that really mean? Sometimes it's become internalized to where, you know, when I came home, for example, when I was unemployed for 18 months. To be honest, I didn't look for work the entire 18 months. You know why? Because after 6 months of hearing no, 7 months of hearing no, 8 months of hearing no, you give up. There is nothing empowering about keep hearing no. Don't say it out loud, but each and everybody in this room, if a sheet miraculously fell down from the heavens above, and it reflected every shameful thing you have done and been a part of, who would dare to stand in the room? Who wouldn't cower? That's what it's like when you're formerly incarcerated, when your quote-unquote worst sins are always put out there on blast, right? So when we start talking about these barriers, it's being dehumanized. We already know about housing, we know about employment, we know about the lack of access to higher education in most cases. I want to add a few things that's important, because sometimes when we think of solutions, it's important. We have a saying, you have to meet people where they're at. You can provide a job, you can provide a place to stay, but let's be real, not everybody is ready for a job. What people really need is a source of income. These are two different things. Some people have those proverbial soft skills. I myself, for example, I spent the third of my life incarcerated. I did 8 years in the California Youth Authority from 16 to almost 25, and I served 5 years in prison. I was blessed because I've had employment experience. In fact, I hold in my hand, I am an FAA licensed airframe and power plant mechanic. You got people who go to the military, they have this experience, but they don't have a license. This license opens the door for me to work anywhere in the country, with one exception, one caveat. As a result of 9/11, the federal government passed this rule to where you must be 10-year felony free in order to work at the airport. Mind you, I went to school and paid $22,000 to get this education. And I'm saddled with debt to pay off for a career that I could not participate in. The good news is I can't now, but I love what I do. Okay? But also, I do want to add something else too. This is very important, because I always think about the on-ramp, right?
Yeah.
Like I say, you can say, I hear this all the time. There's people, they put these job fairs together and it's wonderful. They have 750 people show up. It's a feel-good moment. At the end of the day, you crunch the numbers, only 16 people got jobs. What's wrong with these people? What's going on? PTSD. What I mean by that? In the military, they call it post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not what we experience in our community. It's not post, because we're still experiencing it. So it's presently traumatizing stress disorder. Each time you apply for a job, you apply for a place to stay, and you told no, that's a form of trauma. It traumatizes you when they tell you in prison, what we call colloquially the joint. Go home and do good, and good things that happen to you. What happens when you try that, when you believe that, and you find out that's not true? What impact does that have on you, on your psyche? What's the impact on you mentally, emotionally, physically? This is stress. I don't know, did you notice when I walked up and went over here to deal with the water that's dripping? That's a form of PTSD I have, because in prison, that's a form of torture. I'm someone, I don't like to sit with my back to a door. Why? Because when you see certain forms of behavior take place, that's why I sit on the end. It might be a small thing, but for me, it's a huge thing, because when you have experienced something, when you have witnessed something, that becomes real for you and takes it out the realm of what's theoretical to what's actual. And what is the impact of that on the quality of my life moving forward? There's things that we take for granted. I always tell people, you don't know what you don't know. But what happens when you learn it? Because we're all creatures of habit, and we learn things, and we incorporate this knowledge, right, into our behavior, to our way of thinking. So the last thing I want to say as it relates to barriers that formerly incarcerated people face, it's so much. Some of this is generational. They call it generational curses, because once again, you don't know what you don't know, so you can't teach what you don't know. And certain behaviors become normalized. And I want to end with this. This is very important, because we were just talking about this earlier. I was talking to a colleague last week, and who heard this phrase, crabs in a barrel, or crabs in a bucket? First question, how did the crabs get in this bucket? A bucket is not a crab's natural environment. It's not a crab's natural habitat. So we reduce and limit the conversation to why crabs put each other down. Sometimes this is applied to the black community. Oh, you can't make it out the ghetto because people want to pull you down. Let's think about this. Let's think about people who are placed in an unnatural, when I say unnatural, read unhealthy environment. And the expectations for people to survive in an unnatural environment that creates unnatural conditions that lead to unnatural and unhealthy behaviors. The question should be, why are people in this quote-unquote bucket to begin with? And at the end of the day, just like if you ever watched that show, Deadliest Catch, the reason why people are in that bucket, because somebody make money off of it.
So what are some of the efforts you're leading in the East Bay now? We've heard of some of the great work happening, in San Quentin, in San Francisco, in corporate settings. What's happening in the East Bay?
I'm sorry, I have to smile, because sometimes there's a part of me like, I'm thinking about the bio. Like, to me, a bio sounds like a bragging piece, right? Like, what is it you all here doing? I appreciate the question, but there's a part of me, I'm saying this for a reason, and it will make sense as I continue. So in addition to, I would say two things. What matters to me most is I always identify as being formerly incarcerated. And oftentimes people will say, well, why you just limit yourself to that? Because you're doing so many things. Like we're involved with housing, education, AB 109 on a county level was involved with what we call a 50% win, where 50% of the funds for AB 109 goes directly into the community, as opposed to just going to like the sheriff or probation, exactly. I do it because, first of all, I want to be part of a process that allow people to not have to experience shame and stigma. And let me be clear, that is not limited to people who have actually done time. Family members, you also, in fact, I want to ask a quick, raise your hand if you have a family member or a loved one or a neighbor who is incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. Look around real quick, seriously. Because we're made to feel as if we are isolated, right? It's just us. There's people who I learned that haven't done time, but their loved one have. That means you're impacted. Why do you have to feel ashamed when you didn't commit a crime? You're not convicted. So one of the things I want to do is demonstrate our humanity. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are so much more than that. And the more that I say that, and the more that we say that, then the more that people realize, you know what, ain't nothing wrong with me. It's something wrong with the system that created this condition, that creates the conditions that lead to shame and stigma. The second thing I want to have is this, because you mentioned, I'm happy to say it, one of my good friends, Rob Bonta. And for example, there's a bill that will restore voting rights for people on parole. And I don't know if anyone ever seen the press conference, but I want to brag about this for a reason. At the Capitol, he named me. He said, "You're my friend, John Jones III. I came home, I was on parole. Even though I'm involved in the community, I couldn't vote." Why does that matter to me? If an elected official who's put in office by many of you good people look at me as someone that's worthy of mentioning, that means we are on the right path. You know, you mentioned Nancy Skinner. He's another friend of mine. I shared with her my story, and I want to be real quick. I think it's important. When I shared I did 8 years in the youth authority, I was arrested for being a passenger in a vehicle, which unfortunately led to, it was a drive-by homicide. Someone was tragically murdered. I was in the front seat. At that time, the law was if you were 16 or older, you could be tried as an adult. I was 16 by 3 months. And I was tried as an adult in a system I knew nothing about. I didn't even know you can try a young person as an adult. And this is why it was important to work with them on Prop 57, because it's interesting that at 16, society would consider a 16-year-old not mature enough to handle the privilege of drinking alcohol. We would not entrust a 16-year-old with the right to vote. We would not even send a 16-year-old overseas to defend the country. But if you're caught up in criminal activity and all of a sudden you are sophisticated enough, you're mature enough, you are adult enough to handle the adult consequences of that behavior. Why this is important? Because in the youth authority, for most people, when you go, if you turn 25, your record is sealed. Because I was tried as an adult, it became part of my permanent record. So when I apply for jobs, and they run the background check and they see first-degree murder, what comes up? In fact, to this day, going back to PTSD, I don't drive a vehicle anymore. The last time I was pulled over in East Oakland was in 2015, leaving a Warrior game. OPD pulled me over. What they do, the first thing they do is they run your place for your name, then they run your name. And I look at life, I can look from multiple perspectives. I can understand, I'm not saying I'm happy about it, I'm not saying I approve of it, but I can understand why it went from 1 cop to 8 cops at my car, with guns out and flashlights on each side, barking orders. Because all they see is first-degree murder conviction. That does not say, oh, he was 16. It doesn't say, oh, he was a passenger in the vehicle. He didn't pull a gun, didn't even see a gun. It doesn't say none of that. It just says first-degree murder. I can understand why they can be fearful coming into a community like East Oakland, not knowing who I am, right? But this leads to Nancy Skinner. When I shared my story with her about that, I said, we need to change the laws because in other states, this is called a second-degree murder felony. In other words, you should, when they say truth and citizen doesn't really exist. Like in California, under their old statute 187, anyone that's in that area, right, or quote unquote involved, all get the same charge, even though you're not equally culpable. When I shared my story with Nancy Skinner, I was like, we need to do something about that. Because how many people are serving life sentences and didn't actually commit a murder, but was there and they didn't snitch? So she led the efforts to pass the Senate Bill 1421. And now people are coming home. So when we talk about the work leading, for me, that's the greatest thrill, to be part of a situation to where I'm meeting with elected officials. And I have learned to have not only, it takes courage to tell people you're formerly incarcerated, let's be real. It's not easy to go to people and say, hey, by the way, I was in prison. That's not a bragging point, right? But to be able to feel safe, not just safe, but to feel empowered, to know that not only will the person hear it, but as we talk about policy, how do we translate direct lived-in experience into actual policies that will create real public safety, as opposed to creating these draconian policies that just lock people up?
And to stay on the policy point too, I know that you've done some work, we've talked about housing. Could you share a little bit of work you've done around housing and policy efforts?
Yes, so currently we are working on fair chance housing policy. Well, actually an ordinance. We have a campaign. We're looking to get an ordinance passed in the cities of Berkeley, Emeryville, Oakland, and Alameda County. We know why it's important, but just a little context to it. So the city of Brisbane was the first to have a fair chance policy, but it only applied to the public subsidized housing.
Right.
Seattle came out and became the first city in the nation to have it for both the public and private sector housing stock. Since that time, we've seen an ordinance passed in Cook County, which is where Chicago is. There's a version of one in Newark, New Jersey, for example. Why this is important for me? Because I love Oakland. I love the East Bay. I love the rich cultural, historical legacy and global reputation that the Bay Area has. We're noted and known for being the most progressive and liberal region in the world. At the same time, I'm deeply disappointed that we're not walking out that legacy. Right? When other municipalities are passing ordinance before we do. This is an opportunity for us to walk our values. We can give lip service to it. But why this is really important for us to get this passed, in addition to obviously providing housing for people who are coming home, family reunification, etc., I really believe that we are standing at a historic point in time in history, specific to having the current occupant of the White House. 7 generations from today, will look back on us, each and every one of us, in this moment in time. And they will judge us by the things that we have done, and they will also judge us by the things we have not done. So in the Bay Area, what we have to do is we have to always push the envelope. Why? Because we then create political will and cover for our colleagues in other places of the country who are not as liberal as we are. It's not enough for us to beat our chest and say, yeah, this is Bay Area, we liberal. Let us walk that out. And at the end of the day, I'll say why that is real, because I'm also a member of All of Us and None. And we went to Florida last year in October, and we door knocked in phone bank. Why? Because Proposition 4 restored voting rights for formerly incarcerated people. Can you imagine what it looked like to have nearly 1,000 formerly incarcerated people come together and gather in a fancy hotel in Orlando, Florida, in 91-degree weather, and it's raining and storming? But we're out here saying, hi, are you familiar with Proposition 4? Do you believe that formerly incarcerated people should have a right to vote? People were shocked when we selected to share that we were formerly incarcerated. Because at the end of the day, it's about countering that narrative, right? They will show us going in, they don't show us coming out. So when they say, wait a minute, you're formerly incarcerated? But you're out here knocking on doors, you don't even live in Florida? Why are you doing this? We care. And at the end of the day, I would say this. There's something I always say. I'm gonna say 2 things. The first thing is this. Thank you, I'm good for that. You know, the only place in America that any one of us is guaranteed a roof over our head is in prison. Think about that. I've served 14 years in 15 correctional facilities in 5 different counties, 2 different states. I can assure you, I have never seen a homeless encampment. I've never even seen potholes or crumbling infrastructure behind the wall. We see that in the free world. You don't see that behind bars. To me, that's a value issue, right? But the second thing, and when you really think about this, you know, history will show this as well. All the good fights, whether it's civil rights, right? In fact, next year would be the 100th anniversary of the amendment that, and I hate to say gay because no one can give you something that belongs to you, but when we talk about women's suffrage, there's a reason why it didn't happen until 1920. There's a reason why it didn't happen during the 15th Amendment, because there's always forces looking to push back, push against something that we all deserve. When we start spending more time and energy breaking that down, as opposed to following the status quo approach of looking at individuals who are formerly incarcerated as being outliers, then we will get closer, not only to the truth, but we also get closer to the solutions.
And the final question is just in terms of action that folks can take away, what can folks do? You know, you mentioned advocacy opportunities, connecting with local decision makers, statewide decision makers, shifting norms, right? What would you recommend for the folks in the room today?
In organizing, there are two principles as it relates to power: money and people. You can always donate. Trust me, it's not like there's overabundance of money that's going into the movement. But the second thing, as it relates to people, when I say people, I'm not talking about a transactional relationship. I'm talking about more of a relational interaction. Take some time and spend with people who are formerly incarcerated. That don't mean you have to go to a random stranger. I asked this question for a reason. Many of us have people who are formerly incarcerated in our circles. Ask ourselves, are we part of the process that gets them closer to healing? Or are we also part of the process that traumatized them? What I mean by that is, I'm gonna give you an example of what I mean. When I came home and I'm looking for work, it reached a point where some of my family after 5 months, they told me, and this person loves me, and I love this person. This is what they said: well, you ain't found the job yet, maybe it ain't meant to be. Can you imagine what that feels like? When you're told maybe it's not meant to be, something that you really want. It creates this feeling of we call it the deserving versus the undeserving. And we see this so much in criminal justice movement. Even as we talk about AB 109, really AB 109 is also part of that problem, because it only relates to what they call the non-serious, non-sexual, non-violent. So in other words, who get to decide who is worthy of being a human being? And all that entails. Take some time to get to know people. Also, take some time to study the issues. The last thing I want to add is this, because we were talking about this earlier too, and this relates to what you can do. Educate yourself. What do I mean by that? I'm not talking about going to Berkeley or Stanford or Harvard, even though there's nothing wrong with that. It's this phrase, institutional memory. What do I mean by that? At a time of what people call gentrification, some people call displacement. In other words, we have new people coming to Oakland in the Bay Area. As a third-generation resident and father of two fourth-generation residents, I want to say, first of all, welcome. I know it's an adversarial relation. There's people who feel like, oh, tech workers and new people are coming in and displacing us. That's not my approach. First of all, Oakland's a very beautiful city, and there's room for all of us. Learn the history of Oakland. Because outside of Oakland, when I travel, people always say, oh yeah, Oakland, home of the Black Panthers. Yeah, they're very progressive and they're radical. Somehow that reputation becomes extended to our decision makers. And their decisions are not always reflective of this reputation. In fact, when you think about the Black Panther Party, most people think about the black berets and the black leather jackets. That is not the true legacy of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party did things like free breakfast. This is before the government instituted that. The Black Panthers created free health clinics. This is before the government did that. So in other words, learn about the history of Oakland, because then when you talk about the housing crisis, then you begin to see the history of redlining. You will see the racist, discriminatory housing covenants, both locally and with the FHA. And then it begins to paint a different picture of where we're at. And then we can use that knowledge to, at the end of the day, I would challenge everyone in this room. If you consider yourself a good person, don't tell me, show me. Because at the end of the day, evil succeeds when good people do nothing.
Wanted to thank again our three incredible panelists, offering incredible perspective, places for action, places for opportunity, understanding historical context, understanding practices that are happening within companies. These shifts can happen. They start with us, and I think we're at a place right now where I think from what John was saying with the historical context piece, let us know at TechEquity, because we can provide some of that information to folks. It's the foundational, fundamental step to the work that we do to get you to a place of action. But with that, do we have time for a few questions from the audience? Does that sound good? Would anyone like to? It's a great opportunity here.
Can I say one thing real
Yeah,
quick?
please.
I have the questions. I'll be remiss if I didn't share this. Who in the room has heard of Victoria's Secrets? Victoria's Secret? Who shopped there? No. Do you know who make those garments at Victoria's Secrets? Women who are incarcerated. And I want to share that for a reason because it's interesting that when you incarcerated, obviously you're convicted of a crime, of a felony or what have you. Corporations have no problem hiring you and paying you maybe 5 cents an hour, 10 cents an hour, 15 cents an hour. And you can do that work for 5, 10, 15 years. Then you come home and you apply for that same position with the same company, and then you get told, no, you have a felony. I just want you to just think about that for a second.
Along those lines, is there some kind of list of companies that use prison labor that we can all kind of, I mean, there are a lot of lists circulating around companies that don't have good environmental practices. How can we educate ourselves there?
Yeah, there's definitely, I've seen several lists that include not only companies who directly hire folks that's incarcerated, but also companies who invest in private prison stock. You know, McDonald's is one, you know, Wells Fargo. So it's very interesting. So the good thing is we live in the internet age, and we can look up these companies and we can look these up. But to your point, I always, at the end of the day, putting our money where our mouth is go a long way.
And I can also say that it's current legislation. I don't know if it died or not. And I've been watching only our 7 bills. But when we were reviewing bills, it is a bill to stop privatization jails in California. So I don't know where that is at right now. But it's just an array. I'm going to also tell y'all about this other bill that got pushed over for next year and you can get real disgusted about. This bill is AB 732, a Bonta bill. It got shifted to next year, and all women in here should be upset. This was to have women who are pregnant in jail to have a support person there when they give birth. I've given birth to 2 lovely, big-head little girls. And I could not imagine doing that without my husband, my dad. You know what I'm saying? So, and then the bill also says giving women tampons for free. Come on now. Tampons, we gotta make legislation for tampons. And to know that that bill did not move forward in this cycle, that they pushed it back for next, because you know this is the beginning of the first session, so next year. I think you all need to know that, and let me tell you who was the opposition on that bill, the Sheriff Association. So, I mean, really, like, get involved in your legislative process because they put out good principles. People don't follow good principles. Like we all know when you read the word optional, that means I don't have to do it. Okay, someone says it's good practice to do that. I mean I don't have to do it. So just because it's good doesn't mean, so a lot of stuff now in this criminal justice reform, we making people do stuff. And I mean, just really look at that. I mean, because it hurt my heart that it wasn't moving forward. Tampons and a supportive person, prenatal care within 7 days. So, I mean, like I say, privatization of prison, I don't know where it's at. I don't know if it died. But you need to be aware of this stuff. And it's simple stuff. You could be like pro-victim, whatever, but it's also humanity. Like, women need to change their clothes. Like, the next bill I would want to see is washing clothes because your clothes is not washed every day. I mean, we all are, there's women in here know menstrual cycles. Sometimes you have an accident and you got to go change and take a new bath, you know, and put your clothes on. But if you're not in that washing cycle, you don't know, like, women, like, hair combing. Look at my hair. I can't use that comb. But how many combs that they have in prison that will accommodate combs? You give me a fine-tooth comb, that's cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, and then my Latino sisters say, well, Joffrey, you get 3 of them, you put rubber bands. I said, why can't I just get a big tooth comb? I mean, that in commissary. So, I mean, it's so much stuff, and even on a local level, you can get combs on a local level. You can work with your legislators for Santa Rita jail. I mean, SB 42 is something that happened in Santa Rita jail with Miss St. Clair that left the jail at 1 o'clock at night, and they gave her a bar pass. And bar started at 5 o'clock, and then she was dead in between Santa Rita and bar. That's why SB 42 by Skinner is getting home safe.
Yep.
We were responsible to make sure she got home safe. Now, if she was in San Francisco, she would have got a cab ride within 20 miles. But San Francisco can't be everywhere. So, and I'm not saying San Francisco's perfect. But I'm just, please get involved, because you can do so much at the local level, the state level. Yo, power. If you got an idea, you vote people, you can go tell them your idea. You can do a Facebook post on your idea. Black Lives Matter came here off a post. So I'm just like, I love this work. Because it's near and dear to my heart. Like, formerly incarcerated, that might be my cousin. That might be my dad. I'm not gonna sit here, I don't walk up to people like, did you commit a crime? I just be like, how you doing? And then after a while, I'd be like, I'm a formerly incarcerated, but I'd have never known. Because that's how it is. You don't walk up to people and say, hey, you committed a crime. No, you just talk to people. And that's what we need to see, people that's formerly incarcerated. It shouldn't take a step back, like, oh, he used to be in jail. Or he was in prison. It's just like, it's the same person you met 5 minutes ago before you knew that information.
Sure. Well, one, thank you so much for your time and for sharing. As a Latino and as a child of a former incarcerated parent, my dad did 15 years, and now working, and former tech worker, now working within San Quentin and county jails and Stockton youth facilities. My question is, like, are there any like progressive companies that are like doing work with tech that are like supporting like formerly incarcerated to like specifically like mitigate recidivism? Like, I think the percentage of people that do time and go back in is like still extraordinarily high, and that hasn't changed in forever. So is there any examples of companies that like are doing this kind of work that we can support?
Yeah, my company is one of them. There's a couple of really big companies that don't, in my opinion, don't get enough press for the work that they're doing. Checker is certainly one of them. Checker is a background check company that does an amazing job hiring folks with criminal records. Dave's Killer Bread up in Portland, Oregon, amazing company. It's, I think, almost 100% formerly incarcerated people. There are some companies at a smaller level that are doing things as well. One of my guys from the Last Mile is working at the Mark Zuckerberg Foundation. We've got a couple folks down in San Diego working at a couple of biotech companies as well. So there are definitely companies out there that are interested in doing what they can. But I think we could all agree that they're not doing it at the scale that we need them to do it. And that's really the biggest challenge. I was sharing earlier with Fahad when I came in that, it's nothing more frustrating for me than going into San Quentin and as part of the Last Mile program and talking to the inmates and they're doing great work in the program, and they've got big name Silicon Valley companies in there talking to these folks, and it's very clear to me. And by the way, John, you probably know exactly what I mean when I say this, but there's the bullshit meter in prison is pretty high, and they know, like I know, watching the pomp and circumstance that these companies aren't going to do anything. They're going there to check the box that they went inside, and that was it. And that really was one of my biggest motivators. Is I didn't want to let them down. So yes, there are companies across the board that are doing really good stuff. Some at larger scales than others, but certainly not at the scale overall that we need.
Any other questions?
They're like, no, we want to watch the Warrior game.
Yep.
You're the scorekeeper. What's the score?
You're putting me on the spot.
Come on, man.
Somebody.
What's the score?
90 to 83 is what I got.
Okay.
Yeah. We're still down, but fourth quarter.
Okay.
Well, with that, can we get another round of applause for our wonderful panelists, please? Not to sound patronizing, but the amazing work that's happening. Like, it's really, really good work, and it's work that we can all support, and it's work that we can all get behind in one way or another. So let's do that. And with that, we wish you well. There's still a little bit of food out there for folks who may want to eat it. And respecting our guests again for their time and energy, and of course the work that they're doing in the community. Thank you all for making the time to come today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I was going to say, seriously, I do want to.